Thank you, Aditi. That was really wonderful. How you doing, Mary Jo? How am I doing for time? Just kidding. I just started. I'm gonna read three of Mary Jo's poems, and I knew from the outset which poem I wanted to read first. And the first word in that poem is mother. And then I thought, well, then maybe I'll read a trio of poems that feature the mother. And those of you who are familiar with Mary Jo's work, and I'm assuming everyone here is, you know that the mother appears quite frequently in her work. And one of the things I find interesting about the figure of the mother in Mary Jo's work is that it's not very often presented as a figure of some kind of warm, sustaining kind of alcove of human acceptance, but more of a figure of authority and a figure of law, who lays down the law, and one who's concerned with social codes and decorum. And I think the mother in Mary Jo's work seems to have the phallus, and it leads to an interesting kind of rebelliousness against the maternal figure that I think you'll see play out in these three poems. The first one I wanted to read because I remember when I bore witness to Mary Jo writing this poem, and it's called Gretel. It's in her first book, Apology for Want. She had the idea that maybe we could write poems using the magnetic poetry kit, and I went along with this, thinking, of course, we don't have to ask much of ourselves. We're just going to do some throwaway kind of exercise. And she had cake pans. Remember the cake pans? They were the round cake pans. I believe she bought these to make a poppy seed cake. Do you remember that poppy seed cake used to make? She does. She remembers this. And so we were, putzing around with our I should say futzing, with our magnets, and she was busy, and I kept playing with apparatus, hot apparatus, red hum, and she's like, well, I think I might be done with the draft after about 45 minutes, and it was this poem. And I think you did very little to revise that. Well, you added some, but the poem, pretty much, she wrote this in 45 minutes using a magnetic poetry kit. And I think it later did appear in The Nation. And it's called Gretel. Mother, I am bare in a mist-mad forest. Only the moon shows me love. Winter will crush me. Tiny arms, pale feet, tongue of rust. I have 1,000 visions, you ironing an enormous dress, eating chocolate and honey, sausage and a luscious peach, the sun drunk and easy, spring blowing raw sky and storm scream, someone running, you cry, go, go, take them, will you? He does, along the sea road with its stopped ship fast asleep. In this place of elaborate beauty, it is late autumn and mostly quiet, except when the heaven-born wind wags and flaps the branch he left tied to a sear white ash. Silence itself is strategy, a signed language, gorgeous, fluid in the hands of those who learned it in childhood. You know we were never meant to live here, only to learn relinquished, forsworn, to grasp with wet hands the cold metal of life, then find a way to let go. I told her via text today that when I was reading that poem, I started to well up. I think it's extraordinarily beautiful, and part of it has to do with the exceptional composure that is present in so many of Mary Jo's poems, this note of sorrowful resignation. However, against that note, we have in this next poem that I'm going to read, The Star's Whole Secret, which I think was the first poem I remember that. In Louise in Love, she played around with a very self-determining voice. Louise was not going to be told how to dress by anyone but her own impulses. And this poem shows how the Louise figure rebels against the mother's advice. The Star's Whole Secret. Did she drink tea? Yes, please. And after the halo of a glass gone, a taxi appeared out of elsewhere. 5 constellations, Louise said, but only 2 bright stars among them. Soon, Ham said, the whale will reach the knot of the fisherman's net. The moon will have its face in the water, and we'll all feel the fury of having been used up in a maelstrom and splendor. Mother did say, Louise said, try to be popular, pretty, and charming. Try to make others feel clever. Without fear, Where are we? The other asked. The will, Louise said, the mill moth and the lavish wick, breathless in the remnant of a fire. And the last of Mary Jo's poems that I'll read is from the I Like a Strange Balloon. And this poem is one of my very favorite of all your poems. It's called Mrs. Autumn and Her Two Daughters. And it's named for, and it's in conversation with, a very large canvas by Sigmar Polke. Right? And I had the pleasure of seeing this canvas with you at MoMA when there was a Polke retrospective. And I also have a very distinct pleasure of knowing that there's a line in here that came from a conversation we had. At one point, my wife and I were house sitting for her uncle, who has an enormous apartment near Columbia, and we used to jack up the air conditioner as we were there. It was a huge place, and we called it the palace where we keep our winter. And that phrase shows up in this poem. Mrs. Autumn and Her Two Daughters. We live in an ocean of white waiting to fall. One of us is not like our mother, and it's me. It's I. My eyes are mostly closed. My mother knows how to make snow. We never see our feet. Our skirts end in the oncoming frost. My sister wears ermine. I have a narrow waist. I no longer curl my hair. Why bother? I love my sister, but hate my mother, yet we're all of a piece. Endless snip-snap, ragged fragment. We still live here, where you last left us, between the palace where you keep your winter and the summer garden of the ersatz emperor. Did I hear you say China? If I did, you are right. We live atop the continent that contains such poverty, such pollution, such eerie beauty. Always a mountain, always a screen. White washes over me. I do not act like my mother. I lean farther. What I make annihilates the mirror of China, but not the mountain, not the man walking away. My mother says, throw more snow, but I can't help thinking. There is more to being than erasure. You are wrong, she says. You don't wear your cape. And I thought I'd end with a poem by a friend of ours who, a very short poem by Mark Strand. He died 4 years ago yesterday, and he chose Mary Jo's third book, The Downstream Extremity of the Isle of Swans, for the Georgia Contemporary Series back in 2004, I think it was published. No, earlier than that. Can't really remember, but here goes. It's a poem of his called My Name. One night when the lawn was a golden green and the marbled moonlight trees rose like fresh memorials in the scented air and the whole countryside pulsed with the chirr and murmur of insects, I lay in the grass, feeling the great distances open above me and wondered, what would I become and where would I find myself? And though I barely existed, I felt for an instant that the vast star-clustered sky was mine. And I heard my name as if for the first time, heard it in the way one hears the wind or the rain, but faint and far off, as though it belonged not to me, but to the silence from which it had come and to which it would go. Thank you, Mary Jo. I'm in a somewhat different key today. But you're right, she's very composed. You really are. And we were looking at a poem of hers, an early poem of hers, outside in the Frankenstein vitrine. And she said, oh, it's so Plathian. It's so derivative of Plath, I'm embarrassed. I said, I wouldn't mistake that for Plath. Any day, it's got this beautiful composure that you always have. She's so frothy sometimes and so full of torsion, meaning Plath. And I said, you've always got that beautiful limpidity, that composure. And she said, I know to my detriment, right? And so, absolutely not. And I'll say more when we look at some of your poems later on this afternoon. When I started taking classes at Columbia University's writing program way back in the fall of 1993, Back before communication as we know it, I was new to the city and bumpkin around the edges. I had some hair on my head, but I knew to fear the future, and there were 4 things above all I wanted nothing to do with: Morningside Park, sushi platters, Lucy Brock Broido, and Mary Jo Bang. Morningside Park was said to be dangerous. It was full of damp, littered stairways and inexplicable rocky outcroppings. Anything could happen. I had never in my whole life eaten sushi before, so I felt late to the party. But moreover, it always looked so expensive and refined and way too overhandled. As for the last 2 on the list, Professor Brock Broido and Ms. Bang, they were both so glamorous and smartly put together, larger than life really, and way out of reach. They had mystique. They seemed to know things. I would flop like a scarecrow in front of them, fumbling and ridiculous. And so I steered clear, out of respect when it comes down to it. Respect for self and others, and out of kindness too. I was doing us all a service. Within a year, they were 2 of the very best friends I have ever known, which is at this point likely to say that I will ever know. And they did know things, and they did have mystique, but they kept it within reach. Morningside Park I now know to be wildly beautiful and safe. There's a waterfall there, and yellow willows, and a wide pond visited by great blue herons, night herons, and red-winged blackbirds. I eat sushi every chance I get, and I love how it includes sweet potato, avocado and peanut, and even deep-fried onion. These days. Our much loved Lucy Brock Broido, the one and only, somehow is gone now. An unfathomable reality I have done my best to face every day since March 6th. And how much harder I know it would have been to get through this year. And here we are, approaching the finish line, were it not for Mary Jo Bang, whose day it is today, whose magnificence we are here to celebrate, and whose friendship is bedrock, and who only 2 weeks ago took me to lunch no fewer than 60 floors above the city we met in 24 years ago, or what would have been a cool quarter century if I hadn't been such a clown, or if I hadn't tried to run from my fate. And she did so just to cheer me up over bowls of stracciatella and spaghetti squash. Early one summer after we met, Mary Jo and I were down in the village with our mutual friend, the wonderful poet, translator, and educator, Monica de la Torre. Monica and I both half the age we are now, and the age Mary Jo was at the time. And one of us decided we should go to a neighborhood fortune teller. Miss Donna saw each of us individually. I went last. After Miss Donna revealed to me a few things about myself with what felt at the time like accuracy, she ventured that there was someone out there in that waiting room, the woman she had just seen with chin-length hair, and that she and I would soon embark on a voyage together. We would soon take a journey. A journey? Yes, I and the one with the chin-length hair. We would take a journey together towards success, unimaginable success. We would leave New York and head somewhere whose name began with the letters C-A. You mean California? No, not California. Somewhere else, starting with the letter C-A. And she told me she could see us poring over pages and pages of texts, larger than average-sized pages of text, all in preparation for an interview. You must mean movie scripts, I said. We will be going to California to read screenplays in order to become highly sought-after script doctors, if not A-list screenwriters in our own right. It seemed completely possible at the time. No, not California, and not screenplays. None of that. But we would be very successful, especially if we continued to work with each other, she noted. And most of all, we would be very, very rich. She was certain of it. Miss Donna had much more to tell me, she said, and she let me leave without paying, with the promise that I would come back soon to hear the rest. I never did. Miss Donna, I'm still on my way. Later that summer, Lucy Brock Broido whose papers are in my childhood bedroom right now. Lucy Brockbrotto, who was just about to publish the master letters, called me at my job at the offices of the Poetry Society of America, where I was working as an intern and where I learned to say office in the plural like that, offices. And Lucy asked me if I thought Mary Jo Bang and I would be interested in becoming the next poetry editors at the Boston Review. I said I didn't see why not. But at the same time, it felt like being invited to give an old mauve armchair an intimate back rub. She invited us to her place in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to meet with the editor-in-chief, Josh Cohen. And as we waited for him to show up, we looked over past issues of the magazine, which was in tabloid format at the time, larger than average-sized pages of text. And when we met, we hit it off, and he gave us the job. Mary Jo and I said yes. Only later did I remember Miss Donna's premonition, which had accurately predicted our journey together, the CA of Cambridge, and even the size of the paper. One thing she got wrong, the money. Miss Donna was very wrong about the money. Mary Jo and I had not struck it rich. The job was unpaid, deeply unpaid if there can be degrees of it, and often thankless, and it swallowed all of our time, her time and mine, but it swallowed it together, my time and hers side by side. And side by side, we learned so many things and unlearned others. We would meet at first in Mary Jo's apartment on 120th Street, the same building called home by our friends Claudia Rankin and B.K. Fisher, who would many years later become co-editor at the magazine after we had figured out how to generate at least a tiny bit of money for ourselves. But back in the day, all we had was bread and butter, black olives, and Chardonnay. It was still just 1996 and everything happened on paper. Submissions, acceptances, solicitations, and much correspondence. Proofs and more proofs. Revisions. And Mary Jo kept everything tucked tidily into folders while I, on the other hand, let everything fall with a crash to the floor or let the great sun burn it to ash. Her papers have been acquired by this austere institution, and why I stand before you, that is why her papers have been acquired by this austere institution, and why I stand before you with a cut on my forehead like the mark of Cain. On and on down the gangplank of time. I remember at one point, Mary Jo and I received a submission very early on from a student at the Iowa Writers Workshop named Doug Powell. His very long-lined poems were sent to us printed on paper, not in the familiar portrait format, but in alarming landscape. Who does this prankster think he is, we thought. Though we did love the poems from the very start, their wit, their beauty, their sense of purpose, panache, and form. Part Diana Ross, part Walt Whitman, stop, extended palm, love, suggestion of a hug, waiting my time to be one of the supremes. We better ask to see more, we thought, just in case these are a fluke. And he did send more, and we took them again and again. And later, D.A. Powell, whom we quickly came to recognize as one of the very best poets of our time, told me that not only was the Boston Review one of the first places, if not the first place ever to publish him, we were also the only magazine to have published at least one poem from each of his books. We were on to something. Those were the days. Things were changing in poetry, and we were lucky enough to have been near the heart of it, rolling with the changes and in some measure helping them along, helping them happen. And while it seemed some people took us fairly seriously, and maybe they were right to, sometimes some of us crawled around on the floor and barked like a dog named Roy, or called me up in a lather because of a little typo. In time, everyone was sending us work. John Ashbery, Reginald Shepard, Adrian Rich, Robert Creeley, C.D. Wright, even Harry Matthews, all the way from Paris, all of them dead now. Even my dear friend Mark Strand, who died only 4 years ago yesterday. Even William Matthews, a very fine poet who lived in the neighborhood and whose poem Mood Indigo is truly magical and one for the ages. The single poem he sent to Mary Jo and me, however, was quote unquote, not what we were looking for. It's okay for me to say this, right? I see the kind of scared look on your face. Its title, Condoms Then and Now, in rhyming quatrains no less. People of the audience, I ask you to imagine what it might have been like back in the late 90s at this point, maybe 1998, discussing with Mary Jo the possible merits of a poem called Condoms Then and Now. Those were the days. More bread and butter, please. Many more Chardonnay. Then all of a sudden, we were housemates out at Princeton while Mary Jo had a Hodder Fellowship and I did my first year of graduate work. Mary Jo had by that time already published her first book, Apology for Want, and was on her way to expanding the two separate halves of her MFA thesis into Louise in Love and the downstream extremity of the Isle of Swans, which would be chosen for publication by Mark Strand. Looking over those two beautiful books lately, all three of them I should say, but especially these last two, I see so many references to things we said and saw at the time, so many things I had forgotten. I used to sleep through my alarm and it would wake Mary Jo up and she would bang on the wall to get me to turn it off. At one point I recounted this to my now wife Lynn. I said, "Mary Jo bangs on the wall." And she said, "Mary Jo bangs on the wall? What do you mean she's on the wall?" How could she be on the wall? Yeah, I thought I'd include that, Mary Jo. And how can this be almost 20 years ago? I remember the wild green storm that became the Hurricanium on page 52 of Louise in Love. I wonder if there are drafts of that poem in her papers. We ate Brussels sprouts with gray salt, these little berry pies that captivated her with sugar on the crust. She wondered about my recycling habits. She offered me a Xanax when I absent-mindedly managed to lodge a mechanical pencil's eraser so deeply in my ear it took 3 people to get it out. But at least I didn't have to finish reading D.H. Lawrence's Women in Love. And then you took her away from me, St. Louis. She came back to you, washed you, but that's okay, you deserve her too. And it was more like you had only ever lent us her to begin with. I get it, and you've taken pretty good care of her so far, it looks like, and you better keep it up. Each and every one of you. And take good care of her papers as well, certainly some of which must have seen butter and olives, and others all that Danish blue spread with a knife onto thick planks of pumpernickel with big swollen raisins and walnuts in it. We were wild. One afternoon, early on, when we were walking down Broadway, I turned to Mary Jo and her little brown coat with the Peter Pan collar, and I said, "I smell Spanish bar cake." And she said, "I do too." You know you have a friend for life when that happens. I wonder if her papers include the sketch and pencil she made of herself with the box on her head. And they do. I saw it in the hallway. She made that after your first year here, coming back here in 2000. I remember it that way, and I saw the date and felt really accurate. I wonder if they include a draft of the poem about her trying to cure my migraine with an antique paintbrush. Do you remember that? Not yet regarded a successful treatment. I wonder if they include drafts of the poems she read at our thesis reading back in 1995. The event was held in the beautiful little Renaissance Revival Chapel on Columbia's campus and presided over by Lucy, who was director of poetry. Mary Jo and I sat side by side on wooden folding chairs. Mary Jo on my right, and on her right, Alice Quinn, our professor and poetry editor of The New Yorker at the time. We fidgeted nervously with our poems on our laps like little school kids waiting for class to start. To fill the time, I looked over to make out the title of the poem she planned to start with, and then I gasped in mock disapproval and said, "Ugh, Mary Jo, you're not planning to read that one, are you?" Mary Jo threw her head back. Yeah, you'll laugh and say she threw her head back and filled the chapel with laughter, calling me, as she often still does, the meanest boy in the class. Alice overheard the whole thing, and she said to us in a way that only Alice Quinn could or can, "I can tell you two have one of the great chiding friendships." Maybe so, but that's just for starters. Whatever it is, it goes on, and I wouldn't be myself without it. These last 24 years would be unimaginable without it. Thank you, my friend, and thank you, Joel Miner, and everyone else here at Washington University for letting me take part in this special event. Here's to 24 more years. Here's to Miss Donna, largely accurate, but for one crucial detail. Here's to Not Fighting Fate. Here's to Monica de la Torre, Banging on the Wall, and Spanish Bar Cake. And above all, here's to Mary Jo Bang, on the wall and on the floor and in our hearts forever. Long may she make papers.